Right now, your brain is running a playlist you didn't consciously choose. Someone sends you a one-word text and your stomach drops. A coworker uses a certain tone and suddenly you're 8 years old again. You didn't decide any of that, your nervous system just played a song. Today, we're getting into the inner jukebox, what triggers actually are at a brain science level, how conditioned responses get wired in without your permission, and what it looks like to recognize the patterns running your behavior before they run you. By the end of this episode, you'll have a framework that's both scientifically grounded and genuinely useful. And to dig into all of this, I've got someone who's been deep in this material.
So let's start with the metaphor itself, because it's actually more precise than it sounds. The inner jukebox, as developed by talent whisperers, frames each of us as carrying a jukebox containing every song humanity has ever played. Some songs you know by heart, you've heard them 1,000 times. Others played so early in your life that you don't even remember learning them. And then there are countless songs you've never heard at all, buttons waiting to be discovered.
Okay, so the jukebox is basically you, your whole inner world.
Exactly. And the songs are your internalized narratives, emotional patterns, habits, the stuff that plays when life pushes your buttons. The buttons themselves are triggers, external events, feedback, stressors, a tone of voice, a smell, a look. And here's the key thing the metaphor captures. You may not have chosen which button gets pushed, and you may not even recognize the song that starts playing. But what happens next can reveal something profound about your stories, your fears, and your choices.
We literally already use this language, right? They really pushed my buttons. We say it all the time without thinking about what it actually means.
Right, and talent whisperers actually point that out. Imagine taking that phrase literally. Someone criticizes you, rejects you, questions your competence, raises their voice. Click. A song starts playing. And here's what's interesting. It may not actually be the other person's words that hurt most. Two people can hear the exact same criticism and experience it completely differently.
Why is that? Like, same words, totally different reaction?
Because the words land because something within us gives them credence. Someone says, "You're not good enough," and an inner voice answers, "They're right." Someone questions your competence, and an old song starts playing, "I've always suspected I'm not capable." The criticism pushes the button, but the pain comes from the song that's already inside the jukebox. The trigger happens now. The song may be much older.
That's a genuinely different way to think about it. The person in front of you didn't write the song, they just pushed the button.
Exactly. And recognizing that distinction creates this intriguing space between what happens to us and what we do next. But to really understand why this works the way it does, we need to look at what's actually happening in the brain, because the science here is remarkably consistent with the metaphor.
Okay, so what is actually happening? Like, what's the brain doing when a button gets pushed?
So according to NeuroLaunch, conditioned behavior is the process by which repeated associations between stimuli and responses physically rewire the brain, shaping habits, phobias, cravings, and emotional reactions, often without conscious awareness. The key word there is physically. This isn't just psychological. The brain is literally building new neural circuits.
So it's structural. The wiring actually changes.
It does, and the mechanism behind it is what's called classical or Pavlovian conditioning. Ivan Pavlov's original experiments, which Simply Psychology covers in detail, paired a bell with food until the bell alone made dogs salivate. The bell was neutral, it meant nothing, but after repeated pairing with food, it triggered a full physiological response on its own.
And that same thing is happening in us, just with way more complex triggers.
Way more complex. Science Insights gives a really vivid example. You get stung by a bee, and the pain naturally causes fear. The buzzing sound happened right before the sting. After even one intense experience, buzzing alone makes your heart race and your palms sweat. The buzzing didn't scare you before, now it does. Your brain learned to treat it as a warning signal.
And you didn't choose that. It just happened.
That's the key feature of classical conditioning. You don't choose these reactions. They happen automatically, below conscious control. Science Insights puts it really well. Your brain's threat detection center is where signals about danger and safety converge. And once it stamps a connection between a trigger and an outcome, the emotional and physical response fires before you have time to think about it.
So the song is already playing before you even realize you're listening.
Perfectly put. And this is why someone who was in a car accident at a particular intersection can feel a rush of fear every time they turn left at that spot, even years later, even knowing they're perfectly safe. The brain doesn't care about your rational reassurance. It learned the pattern, and it's running it.
Okay, so that's the what. Now I want to get into the how. How do these songs actually get recorded into us in the first place? And what's happening in the brain as that process unfolds?
So this is where the neuroscience gets really interesting. When you first attempt a new behavior or encounter a new trigger-response pairing, your prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center, does the heavy lifting. This is why new habits feel effortful and mentally draining. You're literally thinking your way through every step.
Yeah, like the first time you drove a car versus now.
Exactly that. But as you repeat the behavior, something remarkable happens. According to a 2026 neuroscience piece from IDEL, activity gradually shifts from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, specifically the dorsolateral striatum. That transition marks the point where a behavior moves from conscious decision to automatic execution. It's no longer a choice you're making, it's a track that plays.
And dopamine is involved in this somewhere, right?
Hugely. And this is the part that surprises most people. Initially, dopamine release accompanies the reward you get from completing the behavior. But with repetition, dopamine release migrates. It begins responding to the cue that triggers the behavior rather than the reward itself. As the IDEL piece explains, citing 2025 research, even when the reward diminishes, the anticipatory dopamine release triggered by environmental cues continues to drive the behavior.
So your brain is chemically primed to act the moment it sees the trigger, even if you don't consciously want to.
That's exactly it. And this is why established habits feel almost compulsive. The jukebox doesn't wait for you to decide, it just plays.
Okay, so how long does it actually take for one of these songs to get permanently recorded? Because I feel like I've heard the 21-day thing forever.
Yeah, the 21-day myth is pretty thoroughly debunked at this point. A 2025 systematic review from the University of South Australia, led by Dr. Ben Singh, analysed over 2,600 participants across 20 studies. They found that the median time to form a habit ranges from 59 to 66 days, and some behaviours required up to 335 days to become automatic.
335 days. That's almost a year.
Right. And Dr. Singh noted that habit formation starts within around 2 months, but there is significant variability depending on the complexity of the behaviour and the individual. So the 21-day thing isn't just oversimplified, it actually sets people up for failure because they quit right when the real work is beginning.
That reframe alone is worth the episode. But here's what really got me. I came across this stat from Dr. Wendy Wood, former president of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology, that approximately 43% of daily behavior is habitual rather than consciously decided. Nearly half of everything we do is just autopilot.
And that number is both humbling and kind of liberating, depending on how you look at it. Because if nearly half your behavior is running on conditioned patterns, then understanding those patterns is one of the highest leverage things you can do.
It also makes me think about the songs we don't even know we're playing. Like the ones that got recorded so early we have no memory of learning them.
That's one of the most important parts of the Inner Jukebox framework. Talent whisperers describe these as songs that played so early in our lives that we no longer remember learning them. And the lyrics are often painfully familiar once you hear them. I'm not good enough. I'm going to be abandoned. I need to prove myself. Don't let them see you fail. These aren't conscious beliefs. They're conditioned responses.
And the wild thing is, the person who triggers that song in you today probably has no idea they just pressed a button connected to something from decades ago.
Exactly. They may simply have pushed a button connected to a song already inside your jukebox. And here's where the science adds something really important to the metaphor. Neurolaunch points out that fear memories formed through conditioning are never fully erased. They are suppressed by competing memories. That's why phobias can resurface even after successful therapy.
Wait, never erased? So you can't actually delete a song?
Not in the way most people think. The old track doesn't disappear. It gets quieter because a new, louder track gets built alongside it. Healing isn't deletion, it's addition. You're not removing the conditioned response, you're building a competing one that becomes the dominant pattern, which maps perfectly onto the jukebox idea of unheard songs, the latent potential, the new tracks waiting to be discovered.
That's actually a more hopeful framing than fix yourself. It's more like expand your repertoire.
Much more hopeful. And it's scientifically accurate. Simply Psychology notes that modern evidence shows anxiety disorders link less to fast fear learning and more to weak extinction of fear around safe cues. So the work isn't about erasing the old response, it's about strengthening the new one until it becomes the default.
I want to take a slight detour here because there's something from the APA's Monitor on Psychology that I think is genuinely wild in this context. They published a piece in March 2026 on music and the mind, and one of the key findings is that music activates diverse brain systems tied to cognition, emotion, memory, and prediction, and that self-selected music strongly engages reward and identity circuits.
So the jukebox metaphor is almost literally neurologically true.
Right? Like the APA piece quotes Elizabeth Margulis, PhD from Princeton, who says, music is an intriguing window into what makes us tick. And there's this incredible story in there about former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was shot in the head in 2011. Her doctors used music therapy alongside speech and physical therapy. She relearned the French horn she'd played as a teenager, and she's credited it with helping her reclaim her ability to speak.
That story is remarkable because it shows how deeply music and neural patterns are intertwined. The brain pathways connected to music were intact enough to help rebuild the ones that had been damaged. Old tracks helping to lay new ones.
Which brings us back to the question of agency. Because everything we've talked about so far could sound pretty deterministic, like your buttons get pushed, your songs play, and you're just along for the ride. But that's not the whole picture, right?
Not at all. And this is where the Inner Jukebox framework gets really actionable. Talent whisperers are clear about this. We cannot control every button other people push. We may not even choose the first song that begins playing. A familiar response may start before we've consciously recognized the trigger. But, and this is the crucial part, once we hear it, another possibility emerges.
So the moment of awareness is the moment of choice.
Exactly. And Neurolaunch's response psychology piece backs this up. Response patterns aren't fixed. They can be reshaped through repeated practice, therapy, and conscious awareness of your own triggers. The science and the metaphor are pointing at the same thing. You can learn to recognize the song, question the meaning you give its lyrics, stay curious about songs you've never heard, and choose what you play next.
I love that framing. Question the meaning you give its lyrics. Because the same song can mean different things depending on how you interpret it.
Completely. And that's where the jukebox metaphor does something that pure neuroscience language sometimes doesn't. It gives you a way to relate to your own patterns without being overwhelmed by them. You're not broken. You're not malfunctioning. You have a jukebox with a very specific playlist, and you can start to curate it.
There's also something worth naming here about the songs we haven't heard yet, because the framework talks about unheard tracks, buttons waiting to be discovered. And I think that's the part people don't talk about enough.
It's the most underrated part of the whole thing. Talent whisperers describe these as representing untapped potential and new ways of being. And from a conditioning standpoint, this maps onto what the science calls latent learning, the brain's capacity to form new associations, build new pathways, develop new automatic responses. The jukebox is never full. There's always room for new tracks.
Okay, but let me push back a little here. Because if 43% of behavior is already running on autopilot, and fear memories never fully erase, and dopamine is chemically priming you to respond to cues, how much agency do we actually have? Like, is this all a bit optimistic?
That's a fair challenge. And I think the honest answer is, it's hard. The conditioning is real, the automaticity is real, and the neural pathways are genuinely entrenched. But the research on extinction and competing memories shows that change is possible. It just requires repetition, consistency, and time, which is exactly what Dr. Ben Singh's data on habit formation tells us. Months, not days.
So the optimism isn't naive, it's just slow.
Slow and specific. You're not trying to overhaul everything at once. You're identifying which buttons are getting pushed most often, noticing which songs they trigger, and then, deliberately, repeatedly choosing a different response until that new response starts to become the automatic one.
And the jukebox metaphor actually makes that feel less clinical. Like, it's not rewire your neural pathways, it's learn a new song.
Which is exactly why metaphors matter in this space. Robert Zatorre, a cognitive neuroscientist at McGill University, is quoted in the APA piece saying that if you really want to understand human cognition, you have to look at the full gamut of processes, from the most basic to the most complex. The metaphor isn't a simplification, it's an access point.
An access point. I like that. So when you step back from everything we've covered, the metaphor, the neuroscience, the conditioning, the agency piece, What does this actually mean for someone listening right now?
Here's what I think it comes down to. Your brain has been building a playlist your whole life through repeated experiences, emotional associations, and conditioned responses that physically altered your neural circuits. Most of that happened without your conscious input. Nearly half of what you do every day is running on those automatic tracks. And the songs that play when your buttons get pushed, they may be much older than the moment that triggered them.
And the person who pushed the button didn't write the song.
That distinction alone changes everything. Because once you know that, you stop reacting to the trigger and start listening to the song. You ask, where did this come from? What meaning am I giving it? Is that meaning still accurate? And then, and this is the part the science supports, you can start building competing tracks. Not by erasing the old ones, but by playing new ones loud enough and often enough that they become the default.
And the jukebox isn't fixed. There are always unheard songs, buttons you haven't discovered yet, patterns you haven't built yet.
Always. The jukebox contains not only familiar songs, but countless unheard tracks. That's not just a hopeful metaphor, it's what the neuroscience of plasticity and conditioning actually tells us. The brain keeps learning, the playlist keeps evolving. You just have to be willing to press some new buttons.
So here's the practical takeaway I want to leave people with. The next time you feel a strong, automatic reaction, the stomach drop, the defensive spike, the sudden shutdown, pause for just a second and ask, what song just started playing? Not why am I like this, but genuinely, curiously, what's the track and when did I learn it?
And stay curious about the unheard ones, because the most important songs in your jukebox might be the ones you haven't played yet.
We started this episode saying your brain is running a playlist you didn't consciously choose. And that's still true. But now you know something most people don't. You can learn to hear the music before it runs you. You can recognize the song, question the lyrics, and over time, with real repetition and real patience, you can become the DJ.